Good morning, everyone, or good morning, it's now good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar on cyber attacks in manufacturing. We're just going to wait about another 30 seconds or so to make sure everyone has joined us that plans to do so. Right, it's 1 minute past, so I think we'll start. So good afternoon again to everyone that's joined us this afternoon. Lovely to have you on board with us as we discuss this very important topic, cyber attacks in manufacturing. A very dramatic title, I know, but very important as well. My name is Angela Doyle. I'm with the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, and I'll be acting as host this afternoon and doing that in partnership with my sister organisation, AustCyber, with Cecily Rawlinson, and our wonderful panel that we have here this afternoon. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am meeting you today here in Western Australia. That's the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. And as this webinar is Australia-wide, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout all of Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and the elders past and present. And if you would like to do a similar acknowledgement, please feel free to do so through our chat function in the Zoom box at the bottom there. A little bit of housekeeping. Thank you, Cecily. During the seminar, we are going to be doing what we call straw polls. So we're going to try and get you involved with this afternoon. We've got a couple of questions for you, the audience, to answer. And I just want to make clear to you that we're not collecting the data, we're not using in any way outside of the webinar. It's just for a bit of fun, just to add a bit of involvement this afternoon. So stay tuned for those. And if we can, we'll answer some of your questions if you have them. So feel free to use the chat function at the bottom there so that we can answer any questions you may have. Following the webinar, we will send out a feedback survey. We like to know what we're doing well and what we could do better. And we also will give you the option to tick a box to get some information afterwards. Wonderful AustCyber has produced a flyer on what you can do about this issue. It's fantastic. I recommend you tick that box when you get that survey form, and we will send that out to you, and I'll remind you of that at the end. You may hear the panel talking to a mysterious Amelia. Amelia is my colleague at the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre in Sydney, and she's helping me with the technology side of things. So if you hear me or others talking with Amelia, she's just helping us with our slides and so on. So I mentioned that we're doing this in partnership with AustCyber. So I'm going to start introducing the panel by introducing to Cecily Rawlinson. And she's the WA State Director for the AustCyber Innovation Hub. So Cecily, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and AustCyber?
Thank you so much, Angela. It's really a delight to be here today, and I'm really thankful for our partnership in organising this webinar. We've got some really esteemed colleagues, and I think it's a really interesting area to be sharing with a different community about some of the risks about cyber and cyber attacks that we're seeing at the moment. So just a little bit of background about AustCyber. AustCyber is an industry growth centre. It's nationwide, and the goal of AustCyber is to support the development of a vibrant and globally competitive Australian cyber security sector. So we've really seen an explosion in the capability of Australian sovereign cybersecurity companies in the last few years. And it's really exciting to be in WA when there's so much happening in Perth as well. We have some really interesting startups. One of them, Sapien, is on the call, came out of some really interesting research at ECU and now is one of the biggest cyber companies we have in Perth. So in terms of my remit, my job and my team of 2.5, so we're a small hub, but with great ambition, is to expand export capabilities, to grow the cyber ecosystem in WA, and to really facilitate connections and play a bit of an education and advocacy role. So as part of that today, it's taking the message of why cyber is so important to an audience we don't have much of a connection with. So we're really grateful to be partnering with yourself, Angela. And to kind of facilitate those connections between specialists and make sure we are raising the awareness of cybersecurity as an ongoing operational and strategic risk for businesses of all sizes. I've got a few links on the right, and now that COVID made QR codes cool again, I've also got our LinkedIn. So if you wanted to scan that QR code, that'll take us to the WA OS Cyber Innovation Hub LinkedIn page, which is where we post most of our events. We do a lot of community networking and education type events, and also try and inspire the next generation of cybersecurity graduates. So if any of that's of interest, please follow us on LinkedIn. And I've also just got some resources here. So we've got our website, wacyberhub.org, which also showcases what we do in WA. Cyber Check Me, which is quite an interesting program in partnership with ECU and the City of Joondalup and Wanneroo, where we take brilliant ECU students and help small businesses improve their cybersecurity posture. So if you are in certain postcodes, we've also done it in partnership with local councils. So if you qualify, you may be able to be entitled to a cybersecurity health check to find out how you are doing as an individual or as a small business. And then the last two, I think, are just really useful resources if you have any questions at the end of today. AU Cyberscape is a list of pretty much every cybersecurity company that's operating in Australia. So AusCyber curates a website which has what they specialise in, where they're based, if they're Australian owned, and it really helps you understand all of the different people out there who could possibly help you if you have any cybersecurity questions. So that's a great resource. And then cyber.gov.au are our friends at the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. They're a really important body in this space, and you can register to become a partner, which means you receive direct intelligence from the Australian government in terms of cyber attacks and behaviours that could be useful. So I don't want to bore you with everything we do because I know we're going to get stuck into a really interesting conversation, but they're just a few links and resources that I thought I would share with you all today that can be useful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or the Hub on LinkedIn, because that's probably the best way to get in touch. So thank you very much. Back to you, Angela.
Thanks, Cecily. And one of the things that AusCyber and the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre have in common is that we're a capability across all industry sectors. So AMGC's remit, if you like, is to help transform manufacturing across the whole country in all the different industry sectors that there are. And so that's why it's wonderful that we work together as we are. I'd like to now introduce you to Dr. Ahmed Ibrahim, and he's a lecturer and researcher at Edith Cowan University here in Joondalup in Perth. Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us today. And could you give us a bit of an idea of what you do, what's your connection to cybersecurity?
Thank you, Angela. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Ahmed from Edith Cowan University. I'm a lecturer and researcher in the area of cybersecurity. And also the course coordinator for the undergraduate cybersecurity program here in ECU. ECU provides undergraduate and postgraduate teaching programs, and cybersecurity is an area that we are very keenly interested in, an area that we do very well. So in line with what we are talking about today, the aspect of critical infrastructure security, that's also another focus area that we have in our teaching units as well as in the research that we do over here. So that's all for me for now.
All right, thank you very much. And I'd like to now introduce you to Craig Morris, who's with KPMG. He's one of the directors there. And I thank Craig especially for coming along today. We were supposed to have Angela Pack representing KPMG today, but she's unwell. And I think, Craig, this is like day 1 or 2 at KPMG. So not just about your experience at KPMG, but could you give us a bit of background on yourself and how it links with cybersecurity?
Sure, thanks, Anja. Welcome, everybody. Looking forward to the discussion today. So my background's been in industrial control system cybersecurity for the last probably 30 odd years. I've been both a CISO and in operational roles. So now with KPMG and with previous engagements, I've been involved in providing advisory services, assessment activities with a lot of critical infrastructure clients across Australia and New Zealand. So I get involved in assessment type activities, get involved in regulatory things like the SOCI Act, right down to getting involved in some of the testing that goes on throughout the life cycle.
Well, it's going to be wonderful to have you as part of our panel today. I can already hear some really useful experiences that you may have had that are relevant to manufacturers online. Yes, fantastic. Thank you. And last but not least, by any means, I'd like to introduce you to Mike Cancel. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Sapient Cyber. And just the name of that company says it all, I think. Mike, tell us some more about what you do there.
Well, Sapient Cyber is a specialist critical infrastructure and OT security provider. We have a series of products in that space to help companies who have that kind of need in security, which we'll cover some of those things off today in virtue of those conversation. Prior to joining Sapient Cyber, I was the we call rest of the world, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, Japan, head of Symantec for consulting and cyber intelligence. Symantec was the world's largest cybersecurity company, so ran that business, the full consulting business there, as well as a practitioner in this space, and also the CTO of Symantec as well before that. And also I was the managing director of Symantec for Australia and Japan for a while as well. So a bit of background in this space for a long period of time.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Well, what a wonderful panel we have this morning, and we've got some questions to ask of you all. I'm going to start the first question initially to Ahmed, but to the rest of the panel, feel free to join in. So Ahmed, we hear a lot about cybersecurity, and I was going to say people being attacked, but it's the business of being attacked by cyber criminals. How big is this problem? How many companies experience these sorts of attacks in Australia? And is it just the big companies, or is it all sorts of sizes of companies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because it will vary from who you ask, whether it's a big problem for them or not. In total, I think when we look at what's been reported over the last year, specifically in the Australian context, it's actually a $33 billion problem. That's how much it's cost Australia based on the figures that's been reported last year. And these aren't the latest figures. So I'd be interested to see what the new report will say based on the current financial year. And when we look at who's being attacked the most, it's a spread across all the industries. So in Australia, I think according to the last reported figures, organizations ranging from the government all the way up to individuals have been a victim of cybercrime. More recent figures reported by IBM also show that manufacturing being the top category or top industry that's been targeted. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was the case in Australia when we see the latest report coming out of ACSC. Specifically in the Australian context, there's an incident reported every 8 minutes. So that's how frequent people are being attacked by cyber criminals. And we've seen that even small businesses have reported in the past year, but most of the incidents reported, or according to the financial loss that people have suffered, it falls within the medium and high scale of businesses. So in terms of the scale of problem, it's quite big, and there'll be more targeted attacks, which we'll probably explore later on today, based on specific industries. So I wouldn't discount anybody from cybercrime or being exploited. And the way things are currently heading, there are specific industries that are more attractive to cyber criminals. So everyone should probably weigh in their risks accordingly and put in security controls accordingly as well.
What would be some examples of the ones that are particularly vulnerable?
Well, so I think one of the biggest kinds of threats that we are currently seeing, according to trends, are ransomware, for example. So ransomware would lock up your company data, make it inaccessible, and we've seen lots of headlines over the past couple of months, even, and then extorting money from their victims. So if you have a lot of money that can be, extracted from you, then you are a big target for any ransomware cyber crime. And the biggest damage from these attacks aren't actually coming from, for example, having to pay the ransom. It's more to do with being offline because they can't continue to operate in their businesses. So there's more cost involved when your operations are interrupted. And the biggest damages will occur, for example, what we are talking about here today, manufacturing. If they are being targeted, then it's not just the manufacturer who is being affected. Their whole supply chain or the customers that rely on that manufacturing process is also therefore affected. An example would be something that's close to us, the JBS meat processing plant that was affected. The company was based in the US, but we felt the effect of it even in Australia. And we've seen the headlines about, the ransom being paid. So I think there are a number of things that we can point out from these things. I think one of the other areas that we are seeing very popular is cyber criminals taking advantage of vulnerable devices, vulnerable systems, or what we would call vulnerability exploitation. So what that basically means is you've got a software or a computer in your organization and you haven't updated it, made sure it is secure, and these are being discovered more rapidly and being targeted more specifically, so that once the cyber criminals in your organization, they are able to then escalate or move laterally and then cause further damage while they are inside your networks.
I'm scared already. Any other comments from the panel, but just about how big this problem is and what sort of businesses are being targeted? What sort of size are they? Do they have to always be big, or are some of the smaller companies being targeted as well?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in just with something that we've all noticed since COVID-19. It's really been an opportune moment for cyber criminals globally, because as you're working from home and you have people working remotely from different locations, you don't always have the systems in place to keep your employees and their devices secure. So it's just made it really easy for cyber criminals to find those vulnerabilities and exploit them. And if you look at the ACSC reports, there's just this huge spike from March 2020. It's reduced a little bit as people are, remembering, and companies are putting in different systems in place. But that's just something to be aware of if you do have people spread across different locations and you're not able to centralize and kind of control devices at the office, because before you only had to secure one network at your place of work. But then if you have people working from different locations, as we've seen, there's a lot more flexibility and remote work, and that comes with an increased risk. That's, I think, quite interesting.
That's a great point, Cecily. I think that whole shift of driving people back home to work from home to keep the business running, they didn't have time to address the risk of cybersecurity risks for that connection back into the office. And what that meant was that actually was the vector of landing attacks back into that business. So the manufacturing business has to keep going. It has to keep producing what it needs to do. And the people that actually are operating some of the surrounding processes are now operating from an environment that may not have the same security controls as Cecily was saying. So that whole risk increase happens from that position. And so that's that spike and what drove a lot of it. And they knew, the attackers knew the moment they shifted that control back into the home and the remote working, that was where they could attack from and then on. So, yeah, very good point.
Mm.
Yeah, I'll also add there, we've also seen a lot of remote vendors, or vendors that used to come on site and perform work, having to move to a remote model as well. And many of those are not equipped to operate in that environment either. So it's the same problem really, but you've got two sides of the coin. You've got your end users being a vector in, but you've also got the vendors themselves becoming a vector because they're performing maintenance or remote maintenance or remote access upgrades, that sort of thing on these systems. And they're not protected either. So now you've got two ways to come in. And in terms of the size of the organisation, it really doesn't matter these days. Anybody can become a victim of pretty much any of these types of attacks, either because they're specifically targeted, if they're large enough, but generally because they just happen to be on the internet at the time. So,
yeah, and to that point, Craig, I think also because manufacturing companies may have some of their own custom process, but generally they use a number of machinery components that are available off the shelf to then say CNC controllers for the shop floor. They could be doing a large sort of processing process. A lot of those components end-to-end that form the solution of what they're physically running are sourced from the supply chain somewhere and have common vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So tracking these vulnerabilities is absolutely key in understanding what that's like. Yeah.
Interestingly, when we were putting this panel together, we were looking for a manufacturer that would fess up to having had experienced a cyber attack. And I did actually find one. And they are one of the rare companies that not only will let people know they've been attacked, but they want to spread the word. Their name is B&R Enclosures, and they were very keen to be on this webinar with us. But unfortunately for us, they're traveling in Europe at the moment. But they were adamant that they wanted people to become aware that it can happen to anyone at any time. And as Ahmed mentioned, it wasn't even just about the money. It was the fact that they couldn't operate their business. And, you know, how do they contact their clients? How do they give them some confidence in their clients that they can actually produce their goods, that their information is safe, and all those sorts of things? The repercussions were huge. So that leads us to our first straw poll. So I'll read the question to you, and just keep in mind that I know a lot of you in the audience will be shy about fessing this up. So I've weaved a bit of a little something in the question. It is, have you been aware of a cybersecurity breach of any kind at your own or someone else's workplace? So it's just a simple yes or no. So you, the audience, if you wouldn't mind clicking yes or no, if you're aware of in your own company or another where they've experienced a cyber breach, and we'll collate those results shortly. We'll give you a little bit of time to put your answers in. And while you're doing that, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the homework I did as I was getting ready for this webinar. I've been involved with manufacturers for a very, very long time now, and also I've heard a lot about cyber breaches and this, that, and the other. But when I actually went out and did some of my desktop research, when you hear of all the different types of attacks you can have and you see them all at once, it's a little bit confronting. So there is phishing with a PH, phishing, ransomware, internal breaches, which is an interesting one, and the one that makes your stomach go cold, or heart go cold, stomach roll, whatever it is equipment sabotage. A real big one, IP theft, supply chain attacks, which we've talked about, and this sounds like it's from the movies, nation state attacks. So there's a whole bunch of types of attacks you can have. So we talked a little bit about which of those are most common. So we'll get onto the results of the straw poll in a minute, but Craig, can you tell me a little bit more? Ahmed's mentioned some of the common types, but in your experience, what do you see as the most, of those, what are the most common types of attacks manufacturing companies experience?
Within manufacturing, what we've seen over the last couple of years, and certainly probably the last 18 months, the more common ones are really phishing and ransomware. So phishing is sending an email to somebody to get them to click on a link. That's a good way to get them to go to a website or hand over some information, which then helps the attacker get a foothold in the environment, and then potentially they'll come in with some sort of malicious software. Maybe it's ransomware. The number of ransomware cases has gone up. I think it's around 33% since 2021. So that's climbing through the roof. Ransomware is a relatively simple attack. Obviously, its consequence is fairly broad, but it's relatively easy. So a lot of these criminal gangs use it as a way to get money. We see a lot of nation-state attacks use ransomware for various reasons, and in many cases, we also see ransomware being used to cover up the IP theft that goes on. So, you know, I come in, I steal all of your information. In the case of manufacturing, that could be recipes, that could be process information, that could be production information. And then on the way out, I present you with the gift of ransomware to give you something else to think about. And I sort of cover it up. Internal breaches happen more with disgruntled employees. You know, they can be a result of phishing as well, because once you've got an employee who's clicked on a link who's trusted, that can turn into an internal breach by definition. But usually we mean somebody who's unhappy, they've just been fired or didn't get their pay rise or something along those lines, doing something. Equipment sabotage in a cyber sense is quite difficult to achieve. It's not impossible, but it's not high on the list of things to, you know, if you're going to rank these, you'd be looking at phishing and ransomware first, and the rest sort of second and third down your list. You know, nation-state attacks, that's just really a class of attacker using every technique they can to come into your environment and do something. We normally see that on the large-scale organisations, very large organisations that have significant economic impact on Australia potentially, or some other part of you know, that sort of scale. We don't normally see nation-state attackers going after a small manufacturer. That's not to say they won't. It's just that they want to spend their effort on the big things where they're going to get the most impact.
Interesting. So it sounds, and I've heard this before, it's almost, you can't take it personally, it's just a numbers thing. They're just phishing, ransomware, they're just trying to get lots of small amounts of money.
In many cases it is. They just send enough phishing emails out across the internet to hit as many people as they can. A lot of people who get implicated by ransomware are small, you know, mum and dad with their home computer, small organisations, small manufacturing organisations, because many of them lack the awareness of cyber threats. They're not aware that clicking on a link may be a problem. Many of the larger organisations have a stronger cyber program, and they do a better job of security awareness, which is really the first line of defence in all of this, is making everybody aware that there is a problem. Don't click on links. And that will actually stop some of these attacks. It's not going to prevent them, but it will start to minimise them. Unfortunately, there's a big gap in both user education and, to a degree, services in the market that provide those sorts of capabilities to help organisations understand what the threats are from an education perspective.
So that's reassuring, really, because we can educate our teams. And it's a people factor that can be easily fixed.
To a degree. I mean, there's a lot of technology that's needed as well, but the first stage is to really educate people about some of these things. I mean, you're not going to go into great detail on a lot of these things. And bear in mind that many of the people in the manufacturing organisation aren't there for either IT or cybersecurity. They're there because they're a field engineer or they're in HR or finance or whatever it is. It's not their job. So we have to be able to give them some level of education to help them spot the obvious things, and then we can worry about the more complex things later on.
Thank you. Well, before we go on to any more questions, we've got the straw poll results for question 1. So Amelia, if you wouldn't mind bringing those up, I'll be intrigued. Wow, look at that. So 92% of you have experienced or seen someone else experience a cyber attack. And only 8% no. So thank you for sharing that, our audience. So the panel, does that sit right with you? Does that sound about right?
I would argue that 8% may not be aware they have.
Yes, quite likely, quite likely. So Cecily?
Yeah, no, I just think that it resonates, and I think there's beginning to be a bit of a shift in that, using the words fess up or, admit, but, hopefully with the increase in reporting of cyber attacks, the more we report, the more we can share that information, the more that everybody can secure themselves better. So I think kind of changing that culture is beginning to change, because historically, if a company had experienced a cyber attack, they perhaps, wouldn't communicate about it and they'd try to keep it behind closed doors. We're seeing a bit of a shift now where people are actually more on the front foot, and they're like, yes, this has happened. This is how you can protect yourself if you're in a similar space or industry. This is the vulnerability that was exploited on our end, and this is how we're fixing our systems and rebuilding trust with our customers. So I think it's that shift in reporting and kind of removing that shame, because it's literally a numbers game. Australia is an attractive target. We're a high income country. So, we're worth the effort. And what we're seeing, in terms of cybercrime is that people conduct phishing campaigns or ransomware as a business. So these aren't just random hackers who are bored. They're literally running a business, exploiting people's vulnerabilities to create an income and then selling that to another person. So it is a numbers game. And as Craig said, humans are the ultimate defense mechanism. So you can make sure you have all the tech in place and make sure you've got, the right cybersecurity consultants and strategy and risk mitigation strategies. But at the same time, if you educate your team, you're much more likely to avoid some of the common missteps. And one of the things I don't think we've mentioned so far is business email compromise. And for me, on a human level, that's the one that scares me the most, because if I see a link on a text or in an email, I automatically go, oh, that's a bit odd. Who sent me that? But if I get an email from my boss saying, please transfer this to a new business account, this is a new bank number, off you go, I need this done urgently. If it comes from their email address, would you think twice? And that's how they often catch us out. And so I think being aware that emails can be compromised and they aren't as secure as we once believed, I think, and that level of understanding and awareness is really quite important for every layer of an organization or business.
And I suspect we've all experienced or know someone who has experienced one of those emails, and I've heard some terrible stories about amounts of money that have been transferred, which they thought they were doing for their boss, and then they find out later their boss didn't actually send that email. Some of them are very sophisticated. We've got a question from the audience, so it's open to the panel. The question is, manufacturing is still far away from converged technologies in Australia, still using isolated manufacturing networks. Considering this fact, do you think this will keep them away from cyber-based risk assessment and implementation?
Yeah, if I could take that one, I understand that one. In fact, most of the network that's operating, say the relationships between the process or manufacturing system, are actually often isolated and not internet connected. But this trend of uptake to connect or to have service personnel, to Craig's point, to actually operate and change things in that environment, there's a continuous injection of change into those environments to maintain them. And all it takes is one mistake. The laptop of the service personnel is going to analyze it. It's not even networked to the internet, but they may carry that virus with them, a USB stick type insertion into a machine. Whatever the mechanism is, they still get in there through, and all it takes is a social engineered attack, for example. One thing we haven't talked about through phishing is the social engineering attack and the internal sort of disgruntled employee example from Craig. It may even be a person who's completely innocent, who's been social engineered to take on some function. So this isolation, and I have a saying, there is no such thing as an air gap anymore. All it takes is one mistake or one deliberate act, and that environment is a closed environment which can implode through attacks. So one of the key things that we find from our customers asking us all the time, actually that's one of our specialist areas, is to come and help protect in those kind of environments, to detect against the normal behaviour, the anomaly, or the kind of behaviour that's different, and protect those running systems from attacks. So just being disconnected from the internet doesn't mean you're suddenly safe. In fact, it can have the opposite and more disastrous effect, because you're no longer getting continuous updates of structures. So you need to manage that very effectively. And if you think you're safe by separating it off, it's not. But to the question's point, so many companies in Australia have still isolated their networks, and that's going to be around for some time to come. Yeah, and they need to manage it, understand their risk, and put the systems in place to protect those systems. They have to. They're not safe.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? Ahmed, you've been very quiet there.
Yeah, I think Michael's correct. You know, just because a network is isolated doesn't mean there won't be an alternative way. I think one of the most famous examples is if you go back to 2009, Stuxnet. When the Stuxnet came out, you know, the uranium processing plant in Iran, it wasn't connected to the internet. It was someone connecting a USB into a terminal. So your network may be isolated right now, but there are people going in and out, third parties, vendors. There can be so many things that can go wrong. And if it is not connected right now, you know, sooner or later, it will probably get connected down the line. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, you know. So the idea of, you know, being in a air gap, being in a bubble away from everything, being secure because of isolation is being proven wrong. And if you have a very highly motivated cyber criminal or a nation state, for example, and if they are specifically targeting you, there's always a way in. So.
Well, that's really interesting, because I think a lot of manufacturers I speak with worry about once they get involved with the industrial Internet of Things, they're connected through the cloud and so on, that's when the risk starts. But what I'm hearing from the panel here is that no, that the risk is already there regardless. So that's
the greatest risk is the fact that they're ignoring that it's a risk.
Yes.
Yeah, and they have to acknowledge that that risk is absolutely real. It is been exploited. Stuxnet, a great example. Ahmed, it is so real. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we might move to the second straw poll before we start talking about what manufacturers can do about all this. So the second straw poll is, how capable is your business in managing its cyber risk? And there's going to be about 5 options you can pick. So the first one is it's not well managed. The second one is there's some risks are managed, but we're not sure what else should be done. The third one, which is similar, is some risks are managed, but we don't have time to see what else needs to be done. The fourth one is we have most risks managed, and 5 is I just don't know. So you may be across a few of those, but if you can just pick the one that's closest to you, that would be very interesting. So I'll give you a little bit of time to fill that in. And while people are doing the straw poll, the next question I'm going to ask is, so with all the things we've talked about in mind, what can the average manufacturing company do to prevent cyber attacks in their business? So it sounds like people are perhaps the first line of defence, but it sounds like there's a few other things as well. And I'm taking some encouragement from the fact that it sounds like there's lots of simple things that can be done. I guess it's a bit like when you have a house, if you leave all your doors unlocked, the burglars are going to come in. But at least if you lock the doors and the windows, it's a bit of a deterrent. If someone's really determined, they'll get in. But it's all about deterring entry, isn't it, into your business. So we'll close off the straw poll for now, and we'll go back to the panel. So let's start with you, Mike. What are some of the things companies can do to, I don't know, reduce these risks?
Well, I think the first thing is to look at what are the separation between what is the preventative things you can do. Education is part of that of your staff, making them aware. What are the preventative processes you can put in place? I'll talk about some of those in a minute. Or how you react if you have been attacked. So the preventative ones, we know we cover off a lot of the pieces there. But at the top of all this is understanding and acknowledging that it is a risk, and you have to put in place a process to go through identifying these things. Your last straw poll identifies a series of things. Where are they on that journey? And we talk about security maturity, cybersecurity maturity. How aware are you, the process you've gone through, what you've actually have acknowledged the problem, have you begun implementing solutions for the problem and putting those in place? And if Amelia, could you please put up the slide, the first slide, thanks.
Sorry, just give me a second. I just
No
need
worries at all.
properly.
And what? Thank you, Amelia. And while that's coming up, for me, it's an important part about the type of business that you are in a manufacturing that helps you identify the kind of things you need to do. So first of all, at an administration level, at the board level, there has to be a recognition that cybersecurity is a risk in your organisation. And here's just 6 examples of the kind of manufacturing types that you have out there. And the attack behaviour and the way you deal with this changes. For example, in the job shop manufacturing end of the spectrum, where there's many people involved in smaller teams, custom jobs being built, the threat of the social engineering, the inside attack, or just in a smaller shop, the awareness of the threat. They carry stuff, they carry their designs in, they bring the designs into the shop floor, they then execute those, and putting the processes around those to understand them, all the way up to some very complex oil and gas continuous process manufacturing activities through repetitive manufacturing. All these areas will have a different type of way to manage their risk and drive security. But there's 2 common pieces which I need to share with you, and please go to the next slide, Amelia, is that the attacks vary with the manufacturing type. So what we need is a combination of vulnerability management and threat detection. So vulnerability management says, I know I'm using some equipment, it's manufactured by somebody else or maybe by us, and that equipment I'm using, conveyor belt, process control, electrical systems, whatever, has a published set of vulnerabilities that are made available. And those risks of those systems and those devices having an outage, they will have some impact to your business. If that is directly related to what actually will stop, then you should track those vulnerabilities continually to see, are there any exploits out there in the wild taking advantage of those vulnerabilities in those pieces of equipment, what they are, how you manage them, and how you patch those vulnerabilities to fix them. On the other side is, when there has been an attack, how you notice that you've been attacked, or detect, as we say, how you've been attacked, and put in place is what we call response and return to normal operations. But manufacturing, as part of a broader OT area, operational technology, often cannot stop the conveyor belt. It cannot stop the process system. It cannot stop the factory from running. It has to be aware of its attack. And because to stop everything may have a secondary effect on a whole bunch of different things. So if the attack is aimed to disrupt or stop manufacturing, that will have that impact. But if you become aware of the patching requirement or the threat of the attack, then you have to wait for the right moment to actually patch the systems rather than ruin the production cycle you're going through in your manufacturing activity. So there's something about manufacturing and OT in general, which is fundamentally different from an IT world. You know, you're dealing with the physical things of the real world when you're building stuff. And that's the key thing, that the OT, operational technology, security, and the processes and prevention you need to put in place has to match the manufacturing business type that you have. And it's so key. So vulnerability management, proactively going out and understanding what threats may attack you, specific to the devices you're running in your, say, CNC machine or something like that, or the threat management about how you detect, respond, and continually protect your environment moving forward. And these 2 work together to give a complete picture. And then all the services, consulting help you have, such as incident response, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, as Ahmed was saying. You will then go through that process of having to respond and bringing your business back to normal operations. So these are the kind of steps you need to go and put in place, the facilities or capabilities, we often call them, to put in place to get things moving. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. That's great, seeing the different types of manufacturing, and the I love your use of the terms vulnerability management, and something we haven't talked about yet was actual detection of the threat, and then what do you do about it afterwards? Yeah, very, very important points. Anyone else got any comments on that?
I think I'll jump in there, and I'll second what Mike's saying about understanding the threat profile in your organisation. It's only from there that you can make the appropriate decisions and the appropriate investment in the things you need to do. You know, technology is great, but understanding what it is you're protecting, where it is, how critical it actually is, and how much you need to invest is really important. It needs to be aligned to the risk level. If you've got a very old piece of equipment that's very critical, you're going to need to obviously put more effort into securing that in some form because of its criticality, not because it's old. The discussion around legacy equipment is a different conversation. But again, that's part of your understanding your risk profile. You know you have old equipment, you know that you have vulnerable equipment. Now, what are you as an organisation going to do to address those risks? What's your strategy going to be?
Okay, so we might move to the results of the second straw poll, and then I'm going to ask a question that's being asked by the audience. So the question was, how capable is your business in managing its cyber risks? So we've got 30% that's saying some risks are managed, but we're not sure what else needs doing. 30%, so the same number, say the risks are being managed, but they don't have time to see what else they should do. And 30% also say we have managed most risks, and 10% saying, I don't know. So that's fairly evenly distributed between the some risks being managed and most risks being managed. So it's encouraging to see that there is risk management going on in those companies. And even where you don't know what the risks are, it might be that they are being managed, it's just you don't know about it yet. Any comments from the panel on those results?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in and then don't want to interrupt Ahmed, but just I think cybersecurity as a risk in general, people are still wrapping their heads around what it really means and what they should be doing. And often it's hard to understand, you know, how much budget you should dedicate to it, what kind of decisions should management be taking. And I think the distribution of the straw poll shows the fact that some, you know, people are beginning to talk about it more and more, but sometimes you're just unaware of where to find that information, how to take better decisions and who to go to, because it's still quite an opaque concept that we're hearing. And I think there's an increased understanding that it is both a strategic and operational risk that just needs to be part of any risk management plan. Over to you, Ahmed.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I just wanted to add and also further extend to what Michael and Craig has mentioned about vulnerabilities. Now, in terms of identifying vulnerability, it is important, but also what I've seen in sectors such as manufacturing or other critical infrastructure providers is having equipment that's been running for many years. Some don't even know what equipments they have. So knowing exactly where their equipments are is an important task, and oftentimes it's a labor-intensive manual task. So that's just one thing I want to add to that. The other thing is on the topic of risk. Not every organization will have a dedicated IT or cybersecurity team, and it can be outsourced to a third party. However, way it is managed, whether it is internally or through a third party, it is also important to test any incident response plans they may have put in place. So those plans are there to respond to risk. And how do you know how well you are actually equipped to, or the third parties are equipped to manage those plans? So if you're paying somebody to manage that risk for you, it's also important to test whether those plans in place are actually working or not.
Good point. So thanks, Ahmed. We might move to a couple of the questions that have come through from the audience. Thank you, T, for your question. The question is, do you think NIST or ISO will be mandatory to implement in Australia?
I'll jump in on that one. The short answer is no. The long answer is the current regulation around SOCI is pushing Australian cybersecurity standards. So the ASD Essential 8 is being pushed to the forefront. There's nothing that says you cannot adopt NIST or ISO, but it's very unlikely they're going to make those mandatory standards. NIST is a US standard to start with. ISO is generally, when we say ISO, we mean ISO 27001. That's relevant, but not necessarily what smaller manufacturers are going to want to do anyway. So some of the guidance that's coming out from the ASD and the ACSC after the SOCI Act has come into effect is really pushing that ASD Essential 8, which on the surface looks to be a simple thing to do, but depending on the complexity of your environment, it can be as significant as implementing a standard in terms of time and effort. And again, this comes back to assessing your risk, understanding what your environment is, what's there, what state it's in, and what you actually need to do versus what a standard says you should have.
Thank you. And I think the next question is probably similar, related to it, from Farrell T. And it is, what are some of the cyber frameworks that's relevant or should be relevant to the manufacturing industry?
If I could answer that, I think Craig was right with his first response. Sorry, I was going to say the second what he said. The ASD Essential 8 and the amount of work that's happened there around that, and the incredible amount of focus on that to bring that to market and to measure against it, I think is a very good way to start. I think it's a clear top 4 of those 8. You need to get those really moving, but you need to also really look at some key areas of your security program and risk model. They are things you need to do almost a process or technical level, but there is a thing you must do at your company level to deal with understanding what business risk is, what the impact on your business is, and model that from a risk-driven thinking. That may be too heavy for some organizations to consider. So the Essential 8 ASD process is going to give you a lot of controls and recommendations you can put in place to help protect you in most cases. But there are this whole focus around education, risk management, the whole risk-driven design of it. I can't recommend enough. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add one more thing, I think from a manufacturing specific or OT specific point of view, the IEC 62443 is something, or more commonly known as the Purdue model, is quite important to look at, because it specifically focuses on putting security practices around industrial control systems, which is what you'll find in a manufacturing environment. So on top of the Essential 8 stuff that you get from ACSC, in particular for manufacturing environments, I think the IEC 62443 is something which most OT engineers will probably be familiar with.
Yeah, 62443 has just been declared what they call a cross-sector standard. So it doesn't apply to any one sector, it applies to all sectors. And supporting Ahmed's point there, 62443 is ideally where you want to head to into the future. But certainly starting with something like ASD, just to get you out of the starting blocks, is a good place to begin.
Yep. And just
probably what ASD is for.
Yeah, I was going to say, Cyber Check Me has some quite good videos that we've created to help explain. So ASD is the Australian Signals Directorate, and partnered with the ACSC, which is the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. They put together a concept called the Essential 8, which are basically 8 things you should do to drastically reduce your cybersecurity risk. So some of these things are much easier to implement than others. And the ACSC have some useful resources. They're sometimes not so user-friendly, but they have the content is brilliant. And so if you want something that's a bit more in layman's terms explained, cybercheck.me has some quite nice videos. But looking at the Essential 8 and implementing those as a starting block, as Craig said, is just a great way to just drastically reduce your risk and help get your head around some of the different concepts. Some of them are easy as just implementing 2-factor or multi-factor authentication, which is when you get a text on your phone, when you're logging in from a new device, and those sorts of basic things. So, you know, making sure you're backed up, because if somebody steals your data, but you have yesterday's data secure and you're able to use it, you're not really going to pay them to get your data because you already have access to it and you can continue your business as normal. So those sorts of things can actually empower your employees and reduce your risk. And so that's one of the, I guess, buzzwords in the cyberspace is the Essential 8. And yeah, some of them are easier to do than others. That's where we're heading towards.
Thank you, Cecily. And just to give a plug for the Off Cyber brochure again, a lot of that information is on there. I've got a question from Charlotte. Thank you, Charlotte. It says, many companies are reluctant to slow to patch OT equipment, as you mentioned, and upgrade risks disrupting production. What key advice would you give businesses around scheduling OT patching?
I can take that one because I've suffered through it. As you point out, you can't just shut a system down to upgrade in the same way that we would in an enterprise environment. What you need to do is, again, understand the assets you've got, but you need to be working within your maintenance plans within the organisation. So if you have a plan in, say, 12 months to do a site shutdown, that's typically when you would schedule the patches. So you can't follow the nice patch regimes we use in the enterprise, you know, every week we do it on a Wednesday or whatever it happens to be. In the OT space, you've got to work in with the maintenance planners, with the ops planners, the production planners, to work out when the best time is going to be. I can almost guarantee it won't be convenient for you, but it will be convenient for the production teams. And in some cases, my background's primarily oil and gas. We've had to wait 18 months to 24 months to apply patches in that type of environment before, because we've got to wait for an oil platform to shut down. And that's not something you do very often. So you've got to make sure you're in cycle with that. At the same time, you're managing the risk by recording the risk, making the risk visible to the board, to the exec team, to say, hey, listen, this is a problem. If the board then decides, no, we're going to shut down in 3 months' time instead of 24 months in order to fix that problem, then that becomes a business decision, which enables you to then obviously do the patching quickly or more or faster than you had intended anyway. But you certainly don't have nice patch cycles.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Craig. I think the OT life is such different from the IT life. It's a whole different kettle of fish, and that structure of understanding what that risk is. It's about the impact. If that device is controlling something that actually, if they were to compromise it, or if there's an exploit, so vulnerability tracking, and there's an exploit in the wild there for someone to take advantage of that, looking at the impact, if that conveyor belt or that process or that processing plant or that wellhead pressure monitor, whatever that is, if that's compromised and then can lead to a safety issue in your business, then you make a very drastic decision to take action earlier. Unless you can connect these chain of events to an outcome that's going to understand the true impact of that and gone through that study, it's very difficult to see the true impact understanding of what that vulnerability or that risk or that threat is. And to Craig's point, you might have to wait a period of time, even years, before you can patch it. If it's a low-grade risk, low impact, low likelihood, then you might wait. If it's a high likelihood, high impact, they'll take action earlier. But communicating that through your risk framework and 62443, other things like that are great frameworks to help you get there. I think it's a very important step to take.
That's really good and useful information, and just get a sense of the scale of time. That's very long periods of time. Yeah, interesting topic. Well, we're going to move the next question to Cecily, but others are welcome to join in after. We've talked about cybersecurity from a business point of view, but let's just talk about government for the moment. So Cecily, is the government worried about this issue? And if they are, what are they doing about it?
As I mentioned earlier, Australia is quite an attractive target. And what we're seeing is that there's an increase in attacks on the critical infrastructure sectors. So as one of the ways the government's trying to manage this, and I think Craig referenced another acronym, SOCI. So that's the Security Legislation Amendment for Critical Infrastructure. So that bill was introduced way back in 2020 and has been debated for about 18 months. It finally passed the Senate at the end of last year, and we're in the kind of implementation and rules and definition phase. So I think that something that's interesting to mention for this particular webinar is that there's just been an expansion of what Australia and the government considers critical. Before, that was just 4 sectors focused around energy, water, and ports and gas. Now it also includes communications providers, financial services and markets, all data storage and processing, anybody involved in the defence industry, higher education research, the energy sector, food and groceries, healthcare and any medical devices, medical provisions, space technology, water and sewage, and then transport and logistics. So it's a huge expansion of what we consider critical. And as part of that, that changes some of your, I guess, reporting obligations as a business operating in those sectors. You can be defined as owning a critical infrastructure asset. So that's, I guess, the Western powers have different obligations now. And for people involved in the supply chain for some of these sectors, I think it's important to realize that there will be a change in behavior coming. You may not be defined as critical at the moment, but you may provide something in that supply chain. So your ultimate end customer is going to expect you to increase your cybersecurity posture as part of this implementation of this bill. The bill has three kind of aspects. One is government assistance. So that provides the government with a way to provide support to somebody who may need it. So perhaps if you're a small business and you've suffered a cyber security incident and you don't necessarily have the internal capacity to deal with it, you might welcome that. There are other larger companies perhaps who have solid cybersecurity teams or work with a cyber company and perhaps wouldn't want the government meddling as per se in their activities. So that's government assistance is something that's offered, and you don't need to be defined as critical an asset to receive that assistance. Then we also have positive security obligations, which is making sure that you are reporting any cyber incidents within a certain time frame. It's much tighter, and that mandatory reporting, I think, will do wonders for the sector as a whole, because we'll actually gather a more complete picture of what's happening in Australia. And there are also enhanced cybersecurity obligations in terms of risk management and changing behaviour. I think another thing to be aware of, if you are manufacturing for anybody in the supply chain, is there are also things that are going to be labelled systems of national significance. So if it is a critical infrastructure asset that's critical to how Australia operates and could have disastrous effects if it was attacked, then those systems have different protections in place, and the government has a different way of defining that and what you will need to be doing. So if you're linked to one of those systems, your behaviour might also have to change. I think the benefits are that people are taking it more seriously. Something that's also been announced since this piece of legislation has come into effect is just a massive influx of funding for the Australian Signals Directorate. There's a project called Red Spice, so just really increasing our capability as a country on and trying to train up a cybersecurity workforce, because I don't know if anybody's tried to recruit somebody to help them with their cybersecurity at the moment, but we do have a skill shortage. So we're lucky that people like Ahmed are training the next generation of bright young things to help us solve these problems. But it's certainly something to be aware of, and the fact that the government's taking it seriously and recognise that this is actually a significant risk to the country. And I think we've all learnt many lessons over the last 2 years around how interconnected we are globally, looking at supply chain issues and, what happens when a train line goes down between South Australia and Western Australia and how that affects supermarkets. What happens if that was a cyber attack? What happens if, one of our major exports, those trains don't work for a few days? What happens then? What happens if somebody is manipulating the price of wheat on the global grain market? Very interesting things that have been happening. And so this bill is coming in to try and change some of our behaviours, and also kind of hopefully reach that balance of giving the government a little bit more power in areas that they need, in theory, to support businesses in those sectors, but also help organisations in those critical infrastructure sectors to change their behaviour and increase their cybersecurity behaviour.
So Cecily, something that really grabbed my attention there, you talked about compulsory reporting. And I noticed too with this government bill that it doesn't specifically mention manufacturers per se, but manufacturing is a capability across all industry sectors. So can you give an example of perhaps where a manufacturing company could be affected by this bill and what sort of reporting they might have to do?
Great. So in terms of the reporting at the moment, my understanding, and Craig and Mike, if you need to jump in, please feel free. But in terms of the reporting, it's around cyber attacks and making sure that if an incident happens, you're reporting it within, a 12 to 72 hour time frame to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, things like that, which in theory is best practice anyway. In terms of manufacturing, for me, my understanding is that it's the supply chain issues. If you think about health and medical, there are lots of manufacturers in Australia that serve that local market. So you may not be defined as owning a critical infrastructure asset, but a hospital will be ultimately defined as a critical infrastructure asset. Therefore, if you're providing something for that hospital, they may expect you to change your behavior, how you're doing your cybersecurity, and also if you get attacked, then you need to be reporting it, if that makes sense. So you may be making masks or hand sanitizer for a new hospital, but you're still part of that supply chain, even though you're not a critical infrastructure asset yourself. Or
in the case of the toilet paper sort of situation that was during the pandemic, any run on supply, and that's, I'm giving a deliberately slightly comic example, but this whole supply chain piece, suddenly there's a shortage, and if you're critical to that path through to servicing the Australian populace to achieve its goals, you will be identified. You need to be aware of that, identify in a positive way, because you're part of something amazing, the country, and you've got to actually step up and help protect us all. It's all part of it. It's important.
And I think those knock-on effects are really, really important, Mark, as you say. And, you know, you may be part of freight or logistics infrastructure. You may be part of the health supply chain, food and groceries, and, you know, manufacturing around that. I think there's the energy sector. Like there's quite a few sectors. And I think, you know, if you're part of that supply chain, A, thank you for keeping the country going. And then B, it's a moment for us to raise our capability in this space.
Craig, do you have something you were going to add?
Yeah, I was really in support of that, because the pressure that's coming down from the government, I saw a question in the QA that I might be addressing by doing this. The government is putting the pressure on the critical infrastructure organisations. As Cecily's mentioned, there is a knock-on effect. So some of the things that, you know, the incident reporting, that's going to become a requirement for those critical infrastructure. They're going to pass that on in their contracts down through their supply chain to the small manufacturer at the bottom, who's never thought about anything other than making the cogs that go into the conveyor belt. But now they have to participate in this as you know, they're part of the supply chain. The challenge that I'll raise is that they're unprepared at this very small level. So we're not talking about the big manufacturers here, the very small manufacturers who make one or two discrete parts. They're going to feel some of this pressure, and they're completely unprepared for what's going to come out of as a result of SOCI. You know, these guys go and buy their laptops at JB Hi-Fi. They're not thinking much beyond that, and they're going to have to start thinking beyond that. And I really think that's where organisations like AusCyber and the Cyber Check Me and those sorts of things can come into play as well, because there's I'm probably going a little bit off topic, but there's a bit of a gap in the market. You've got your large manufacturers, they can take advantage of larger organisations to support them. Your mid-market, there's usually someone in that space, but it's the very small end of the market that there's a distinct gap in capability to support these smaller organisations.
Yeah, and just to echo Craig, we do see that small business, whether you're a manufacturer or a provider of a service or a product, are the most at risk in terms of cyber attacks. They're also, I guess, least capable of withstanding a cyber attack, because if you're, you know, a giant bank, you can probably take a loss. But if you're a small business working on turnover, you know, $15,000 could clean you out for a few months. And that really stops. We've seen small businesses in Perth go out of business permanently because of one cyber attack. So that's something that AusCyber is passionate about, is trying to support small businesses, particularly in the critical infrastructure supply chain. And it's a body of work we're going to be conducting this year and next. But if anybody on this webinar is interested in looking at Cyber Check Me as a possible support for upgrading some of their cyber capability and others, we're definitely trying to do our best, because you're exactly right. There is a gap both in understanding, but also in people to support you in that process and learning how to, you know, get better at managing this risk.
Thank you. And Craig's partly answered a question from T, but I'll just add to it a little bit. T says, I see many manufacturing businesses avoid to adopt cybersecurity as part of the manufacturing process. Could you please answer why? How can we improve this behaviour? As someone who has run a manufacturing organisation and who also now works with many manufacturing companies in my role, cybersecurity is seen as one of a broad breadth of risks you have to manage in a business. You know, there's financial risks, there's physical safety risks, there's cybersecurity risks, there's all sorts of risks. And when you're running a business from day to day, it's like one of the many things you have to do. Besides, you know, there's a skill shortage at the moment. Cash flow is pretty tight for companies because we've just been through a pandemic and still going through it. So there's all sorts of things. And unfortunately, this topic often sort of floats down to the bottom because it's not screaming at you. It's one of these sort of invisible things that you'll get around to. The other thing I alluded to is, you know, cash flow will be tight for many companies at the moment. And they are screaming for staff as well. So when you're the owner of a business and you've got to jump on the workshop floor because you can't get a Freddie or a Mary to help you with that equipment, you're not thinking about cybersecurity. So those are often reasons why this is not given the priority it needs. What's there to help? Well, we've got wonderful AusCyber, that's, you know, through government support, although that's also got private investment in that now. Helping with that, and all the government agencies that you can find on the AusCyber brochure. So I hope that answers that question a little bit. We're going to move along a bit because time is marching on. Yeah, I guess it's a follow-on from T's question. One of the other reasons that companies don't engage in what they need to with cybersecurity is they are not IT or cyber specialists. Many business owners I have worked with and work with are quite good technically at the thing that they manufacture, but they're not necessarily have the capability or understanding that they need to address cybersecurity risks. So besides going to AusCyber, what other sort of support is out there, or what strategies can they implement to help with that?
If I can just answer that, I think the one of the things about that are this, what Cecily said about this shortage, the global shortage of people, skilled people in this area. So companies that may not be holding in their own staff any capability or awareness of this, but at the same time, they have to draw upon a market which is unfortunately quite hot at the moment in terms of its the amount of people who actually, the shortage of people, the need for it, and the focus. And so this means that this combination of people, process, and technology, we have to use better blueprints, better standards, the conversation 62443 and these things. Use these tools, use and scale through the use of tooling as well as process, because we can't necessarily sustain the amount of people required to do it. We have to think about difference in operational tools, but also the best way to tackle it is also to identify that it is a risk and begin to put in place to address it. There's some fantastic companies that can help larger companies drive that risk management change, KPMG being one of them, Craig's from, and through down to how the tools that actually execute that help vulnerability manage and protect organizations through detection and so on. So use of tooling is key. And it's not just an antivirus piece of software and all those things that people throw some Norton on there and think the problem's gone away. It's far more than that. But we're not going to solve it just with people alone. It's people, process, and technology. And manufacturing is heavy on the process need. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel? Ahmed?
Yeah, I think just to answer that question, in terms of resources, probably start by going at the ACAC website. There's a wealth of information that are there depending on the size of your organization as an individual or as a business. So I think that's a good place to start. And I think one of the big challenges we have is a mindset. So there's a cultural issue. I think that when it comes to cybersecurity, people normally say, like you said, Angela, they would say, I'm not an IT person, I don't understand this. So I think we need to have a rethink about how we view cybersecurity, really understand that this involves everyone, you know. So we need to be literate enough to understand those basics, you know, like not sharing your password, not clicking on links. We are still talking about people clicking links. People still click links. People are still falling victim to phishing emails. And in fact, that's the easiest way criminals are able to successfully launch ransomware campaigns, right? So there's a big problem when it comes to teaching people, keeping them aware of cyber safe practices. And there's no easy answer to that. I think we have to continue with the programs that we are running, what Cecily mentioned about the Cyber Check Me program, and there are lots of resources out there. So I think we have to, as a society, as a human race, you have to move away from thinking about cybersecurity, thinking that it's an IT problem. It's an everybody problem. So I think that's the mindset we need to change moving forward. That will probably remove a lot of obstacles that we have and be willing to actually get into it and then just learn a few new things, which isn't actually very hard.
Okay, Ahmed. We've talked about the human element of cyber, and the best training programs that we've heard about are not the ones that teach you how to be cyber safe at work. They teach you with real world examples about your personal life. Because if you think through how you use your phone, how you use your email at home in your personal life, if you think about educating your aunts or your uncles or your grandmas about keeping them safe, that's the stuff that you really care about. And people also care about what they do at work. But if you upskill people and get them to think differently about their personal cybersecurity, ultimately, they're going to be a safer person at work as well. And so something we've heard a lot about as an example of successful cultural change is occupational health and safety, 2-minute safety moments and things like that. We've seen a huge transformation in Australian culture at work around work safe and occupational health and safety. And it's that same kind of transformation, cultural change that we need to see in parallel with all of the, technology and vulnerability and threat detection systems in place as well. So I think we're in that moment. And so if you're thinking that a PowerPoint induction on how to be cyber safe is going to work, your employees are just going to click through it as per normal while doing their online banking. But what we really need to do is really great education systems which help people understand their personal risk, and that will also transform them into safer, cyber safe employees at work as well.
Cecily, that's such a great comment you made, and in fact, that lost time through injury type safety measurement transformation that these companies have done, and to transform to safety measurement and a better outcome. We need some measurement like that for companies, like maybe lost time through cyber or something like that, where you can actually measure this at board level and allow that change to deal with the board level all through the layers of management, and to identify and connect back to the personal risk involved through those people, as you say. So that connecting all those dots together in that organisation, all the layers there is key. We've got brilliant in Australia at managing the LTI, the lost time through injury, and so on, and the safety focus, as you say. We can translate that to a cyber awareness. Yeah.
Okay, we're coming close to the end of our webinar, so I'm just giving the panel notice that after my next question, I'm going to ask each of you to share your one key message that you would like our audience to hear following all the discussions we've had. So I'll just let you percolate that away in your minds as I ask the next question. The next question is about the industrial Internet of Things. So we're seeing more and more workshops where devices are connected through the cloud. We're collecting a lot of data, analysing that data and using that in a meaningful way to improve the business process and so on, so IIoT. And there's a lot of benefits to this, but I mentioned earlier, one of the concerns I hear all the time about this is, but what about cyber attacks? So we heard that even standalone pieces of equipment are at risk, but I think IIoT deserves a bit of a discussion here. What's some advice you could give to people who have or are thinking about adopting IoT on their workshop floor?
I might start that one, because IoT is while it's a technology, it's also a mindset shift. So if organisations are currently struggling with cybersecurity in what I guess you could term a normal environment, so the equipment's on their floor, they can see it, they can touch it. When you move to IoT, you add the addition of cloud and all of those additional services. Again, this conversation really comes back to understanding what it is you're doing, what your risks are, but also understanding that in the case of IoT and what we really call Industry 4.0, which is where we automate a lot more than we currently have, it's knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, but also changing your approach, because with IIoT, you're really taking a lot of the human interaction out of this as well. So you're losing some of the human checks and balances. When someone's looking at a pressure valve, visually, they can see that the pressure's at a certain setting. But once you move to the IIoT, that's all automated. You have, boundaries set within the software to manage these things. And there needs to be more focus on understanding exactly what it is you're doing in that space and why you're doing it. And what I see a lot of is some organizations they want to go for the next thing. So part of their upgrade is to go to IIoT without understanding what IIoT actually means. To many people, it's just the latest, fastest thing, but that's not actually what's happening. You're making some fundamental shifts, which your board and your execs need to be aware of before going down that path. It's not a case of getting the guy who's currently doing it and just saying, do more of it. You need a couple more people. And that's really where you find yourself having to go out to external organizations to help secure those things, because your architecture changes, your processes change, everything changes. So it's not a simple conversation to have.
Thank you, Craig.
I just want to add to what Craig mentioned. When we say IIoT, I think we can often miss the point that that's also another computer that you're connecting to your network. So it may be very small, it may be deceptively, little. However, it is another threat surface that you are exposing your network to. And on top of that, you are linking up with applications you have on the cloud. So, which means you are introducing more vendors into your environment. So again, adding further complexity. So like Craig said, you really need to know why you are actually doing it. And if it is necessary, do it in a calculated manner.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's been a really interesting webinar, and I really appreciate the thoughts and insights that the panel has shared, and also the questions from the audience, which have been really valuable. Certainly what I'm taking away from this is the more aware of the need for cybersecurity measures, the better. Just starting to think about it, allocating time as a business to think about this, manage it, work out what your strategy is in this regard, considering the business culture, how are you communicating this with your staff, what messages are they hearing, how are they responding. It's not just about the technology. So as I said, it's people, processes and technology. It's not just the technology. So that's certainly what I've taken away from today. So we might just go around the room, the virtual room, just to get their key messages. So Cecily, we might start with you. What one message would you give to our audience after today?
It's not as overwhelming as you think. So it is possible to reduce your risk by doing some relatively basic things to get you started. And then if you do need support, there are some really great organizations based in Australia that can help you. And, depending on the scale of things, it's also not as expensive as you think. So don't hesitate to reach out to support from AusCyber, or if not, register on the ACSC. So cyber.gov.au website, because those alerts and their resources are really, really good. And that's direct from the government and our intelligence services. So don't be scared of it. Better to do something about it than nothing.
Great, thank you. Ahmed, what have you got to say for us?
I think probably if it was one thing, I would say just be proactive and be prepared in advance. Don't wait till things go wrong. So that will be my quick message I want to give.
That's very good advice. Thank you. Thank you. Craig, what little gem have you got for us?
Primarily to understand the landscape you're operating in, and then make decisions based on your landscape, not what a standard tells you to do or what another manufacturing organisation is doing. Certainly look at what the other manufacturing organisation is doing, but take the bits that work for you. Don't get overwhelmed by 300 things. Focus on the 10 things that mean something for you specifically.
Great, thank you. And finally, Mike.
Thank you. I think those last three summaries are almost leaving me not much. They're all very good. If I could say one thing that there it's that 8% versus 92% from the first straw poll. I made the comment about that I would be surprised the 8% had been attacked and wasn't aware of it. It will happen. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. It has to be a proactive risk managed exercise you go through to address it. Acknowledgement that it is real is a key piece. The very fact you're on this call with interest today is generally a clear indicator that you're aware there's an issue to resolve, and it's actually the other hundreds of, maybe thousands of manufacturing companies which aren't addressing this risk, aren't on this call, aren't aware. How we get to those organisations and help them understand this. It's a growing problem, because the ones that are active are the ones we can deal with. The ones we don't know about, the unknown problems. But this is a serious issue and affects our country. We need to manage it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And if I can put my old business management hat on, I used to be a business advisor and I had a business coach at one stage when I was running a business. I had a long list. It was a really long list. I think it was 2 pages of things I should do. And my coach said to me, if you worked 100 times the hours you work each week, would you get all these done? And I went, no. So his advice to me was pick the top 3 things that are most likely to happen that will have the most impact. Work on those first and ignore the rest for the time being. Once you've knocked those out of the park, then you work on the next on your list. So if I could provide a bit of advice, is we've given you a lot of information. It sounds scary, but I think, if you get the follow-up information from this, dedicate some time to it and think, what's the most likely thing to happen in my business? And which is those will have the most impact. And it sounds to me like it's phishing and ransomware. What can you do about that? Get onto it, then get onto the next bits. As I mentioned quite a few times now, you do have a wonderful resource here with the Cyber brochure, and I do recommend you have a look at it, because it can feel a bit overwhelming when you finish the webinar like this. Where on earth do I start? So perhaps that's your first action, is to have a look at that and work out what you're going to do. I would like to thank the audience for joining us today, and a big thank you to our panel. So Cecily Rawlinson from AusCyber, Michael Council from Sapient Cyber, Craig Morris from KPMG, and Dr. Ahmed Ibrahim from Edith Cowan University. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely amazing getting your knowledge and insights on this topic. So thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure, Angela.
Pleasure indeed.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great day.
Thank you.